Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
The number of trucking jobs in the U.S. economy went up last month. And while that may seem like good news, there's another side to the story. David Spencer of Arrive Logistics joins the program to talk about what the numbers tell us about the state of trucking at large. Dispatching services are becoming more common and more truckers are using them. So are they a good idea or not? Tom Crowley and Joe Biggs of OOIDA's Business Services Department come on the show to discuss that and whether now is a good time to get your own authority. And finally, there's been a decrease in load volume on DAT's load board. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford gets the latest on market conditions and what the forecast looks like leading up to Thanksgiving. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today, yet more confirmation that diesel prices are on the slide. The Energy Information Administration's latest weekly report shows prices dipping nearly a dime last week to an average of $4.49 a gallon. The report coming one day later than normal due to Monday's federal holiday. The drop last week follows a slight increase the week before, but over the past 3 weeks, prices have gone down in two. Last week's dip was seen across the country. The average was down in all 10 regions EIA tracks. The Gulf Coast recorded the biggest decline of 14 cents. Gas prices also on the decline according to the EIA numbers. The average for a gallon of diesel was down more than 11 cents last week to an average of $3.68. A new piece of bipartisan legislation in the House seeks to establish a central office dedicated to keeping the supply chain moving. The Strategic Homeland Investment in Economic and Logistical Defense, or SHIELD Act, would establish the Office of Economic and Security Preparedness and Resilience. Its job would be to set priorities and coordinate efforts among federal agencies and transportation industry stakeholders to map, monitor, and analyze supply chains that are critical to the national security of the United States. Representatives Jim Banks of Indiana and Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut are co-sponsoring the bill. Congressman Banks said the COVID-19 pandemic made clear that America's reliance on China for making basic things is a liability. He also said the bill would shine a light on the vulnerabilities that exist and fix them, paving the way for policies meant to enhance resilience along supply chains. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has granted a 2-year exemption that will allow certain agricultural drivers under the age of 21 to operate interstate. U.S. Customs Harvesters is the beneficiary. It was already working on a 5-year exemption from the rule that ran through the beginning of this month and had asked FMCSA for an extension of another 5 years. The agency granted it 2, though. Part of the reason there, FMCSA said, was that some crashes involving exempted drivers were not reported. FMCSA said it obtained 14 police crash reports involving under 21 custom harvesting drivers in the past 5 years. The agency, however, concluding that there is insufficient information to suggest that the exemption had hindered safety. Current regulations require interstate commercial driver's license holders to be at least 21, while 18 is the minimum age for intrastate drivers. FMCSA already provides an exception to the minimum age requirements for interstate custom harvesting drivers who travel from state to state, helping farmers cut crops. However, states may include an intrastate-only restriction on the license. This exemption grants relief from that restriction. Although the exemption has already been renewed, FMCSA will accept comments on the notice through November 13th. The Women of Trucking Advisory Board will hold its final meeting later this month. The group will get together virtually on October 26. Its main focus will be looking at ways in which trucking companies, trucking associations, and other industry stakeholders can work together to support women pursuing careers in trucking. After wrapping up its final meeting, the 15-person board will be cut down to 6. Those remaining members will be responsible for compiling the recommendations from previous meetings and preparing the board's final report for FMCSA. The creation of the board was mandated by Congress as part of the 2021 infrastructure law, with the goal of making recommendations to FMCSA on how to recruit and retain more women in the industry. The board statutes dictate the final report be filed within 2 years of that law being enacted, making the deadline next month. After a nearly month-long hiatus, cargo processing has resumed at the Bridge of America's cargo facility in El Paso, Texas. The new hours for the time being from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday. U.S. Customs and Border Protection suspended cargo processing operations at the Bridge of the Americas on September 15th. At the time, the agency said the suspension would allow agents at the border crossing to help the U.S. Border Patrol process non-citizens who have arrived between the ports of entry. While the resumption of services will provide another entry point, CBP is still encouraging carriers to continue using the nearby Isleta, Santa Teresa, or Marcelino Serna ports of entry. Operating hours at two of those facilities in particular have been extended to ease the burden on carriers. A proposed truck stop in northeastern Illinois is getting pushback from the community around it. Quick Trip is hoping to build a new location in Burr Ridge off Route 83, about 30 minutes west of Chicago. But residents aren't too keen on the idea, apparently. Neither is the school district, which adopted a resolution last week opposing the truck stop. Their concerns should sound familiar. They range from noise and pollution to increased traffic that opponents say would interfere with school buses picking up and dropping off students. An online petition against the truck stop has also garnered support, with more than 2,000 people signing on at last check. The DuPage County Zoning Committee is aware of those concerns and says it'll address them during a hearing on Thursday. A Michigan trucking company has been shut down, leaving dozens of truck drivers in the lurch. Target 8 News out of Grand Rapids reports that Sunset Logistics closed abruptly late last month without warning. One of the company's drivers said he and his colleagues have not gotten final paychecks or the $1,000 Sunset kept from each driver's pay to hold in escrow. Those who spoke with Target 8 are upset about how the closure went down. The company has not yet responded to multiple requests from Target 8 for comment, but the news station did get its hands on an email that Sunset's owner sent out to workers. Harvey Gainey III wrote that the economy has been horrid, freight has been slow, and rates have been in the toilet, as he said, and that ownership can no longer fund the business. The state of Kentucky is asking truck drivers to stop using rural roads as shortcuts, and it's less a request and more a warning. In a statement, the Kentucky State Police and the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet said too many long-haul truckers are taking routes that have not been established as appropriate for the weight and size of their vehicles. And it's not just a safety issue. Officials say the rural roads are not designed for heavier vehicles and are being damaged. Kentucky Route 286 in Ballard County was singled out in the statement. Officials said the road is often being used as a cut-through between Wickliffe and Paducah. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet said truckers should use US 60 instead of Route 286, but officials added that the problem is not confined to Ballard County or even nearby Graves County, where troopers have stepped up enforcement recently. It's a statewide problem, they say. Along with increased patrols and numerous citations being issued, no truck signs have also gone up on various state highways. Part of the problem, officials say, is that many commercial vehicle drivers are using passenger vehicle GPS apps that steer them down restricted roads. Kentucky officials are reminding truckers to use navigational tools specifically designed for commercial vehicles. And finally, the numbers are in from this past weekend's 19th Special Olympics Minnesota convoy. More than $25,000 was raised. More than 80 trucks and 45 athletes took part in the convoy, which began at Running Aces Casino and Racetrack in Columbus, Minnesota, and traveled 30 miles to Harris. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Do you have a news tip? Or maybe you have a comment about something you heard on the air? Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Next, Scott Thompson gets some analysis of trucking jobs numbers from David Spencer of Arrive Logistics. I'll discuss dispatching services with Tom Crowley and Joe Biggs of OOIDA's Business Services Department. And Ashley Blackford takes a look at the freight market with Robert Rouse of DAT. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. you need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Welcome back to the show. Every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases the latest data surrounding trucking jobs, and every month, we report on those numbers and provide some context, but those numbers can often tell a story if you look a little closer, which is what we're going to do with our next guest, David Spencer. David is Vice President of Market Intelligence at Arrive Logistics, and he joins us on the line now. David, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Scott. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. We spoke to you, I guess, a few months ago, and I was just telling you, you provided some nice context and nice clarity for all these numbers that get thrown at us all the time, and we're going to do a little bit of that here today. And I want to start with kind of, I guess, good news, bad news with the job numbers for September. We'll start with the glass half full perspective, that being after 2 months of decreases, that number of people employed in trucking actually went up in September, about 9,000. Let's talk about that spike there. We are still down for the year, but again, the numbers seem to be reversing a little bit, and now we're adding jobs to the trucking economy.
Yeah, I mean, you take the jobs being added with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? In addition to the jobs added in September, we saw revisions to July and August. So, ultimately it ends up not being, as large of a jump when you take into account, understated job losses in July and slightly overstated, job losses in August. And really, when you look back to August numbers, we saw 8,100 less jobs than were originally stated. So, all in all, when I think about where we're at from a September perspective, yes, there was certainly some job growth, but to the tune of 9,000, I think most of that is mostly just noise.
Yeah, interesting you put it that way, as being just noise, because obviously people are still hurting out there. And I know you spoke with our colleague, Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine, a bit about this. And, kind of now looking at the glass half empty perspective, you kind of said that the job gains that we saw here last month and are seeing could spell problems down the line. What exactly are your concerns there? Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, and I think it's important when we're talking about trucking employment to be specific about what we're talking about in terms of what size truck and what type of equipment we're talking about. Right, when you look at total trucking employment, you may see that some sectors, bulk or smaller classes, you're seeing some growth. You're seeing some reentry into the industry. Construction spending is up, and but from that other side of the coin here, when we talk about Class 8, et cetera, that's where we've really seen the biggest hit in terms of, poor trucking conditions, financial challenges for carriers, low spot rates, and overall, just like I said, poor trucking conditions that are really creating some challenging conditions for truckers.
Yeah, and I guess that's a question, is if you're adding jobs, the current landscape out there, as we well know, with spot rates being what they are and the various challenges that are out there, I guess the question is, is adding more people to the industry in terms of trucking jobs going to help anybody? Because I guess the answer would probably be no, because you're watering things down a little bit there.
Look, we've seen this across a number of different industries, and protecting labor forces has been a trend we've seen since COVID. And even though we're going through a bit of a down cycle here, you're still seeing stickiness with labor and employment, and a lot of that is this thought and this perspective about, okay, at some point we may need them, right? We may need these people. You look at the same kind of context to the equipment production side of things. These OEMs, it's in their best interest to create an environment that's a little bit more constrained of capacity to help carriers see some better rates, because that's when carriers invest in new equipment. However, they've really indicated they're going to ramp up production of new equipment beginning of Q1, and so that certainly creates additional downward pressure on the rate environment when you see capacity or driver availability be on the stickier side and not exiting the market and coming in is it doesn't allow that balance to be made between the supply side and the demand side, and ultimately that's why we've seen the spot rate environment go to what I'm calling unsustainable levels, simply because it's the current national average spot rate per mile, which I think you were pointing to, being below operating costs per mile for many carriers.
Yeah, and that's the way it has been for, it feels like forever now. I mean, it's been how many months it's been now, I'm not quite sure. I didn't look at that. But the current environment just is not sustainable for people, and we are seeing a bunch of people leave the industry, which is why it is a bit confusing, again, when going back to these trucking job numbers, when we're looking at adding jobs to the trucking economy, it just kind of tells a different story. And that's why it is a bit confusing, I think, for people sometimes, including myself, when you look at this and you think, oh, that's a good thing. But on the other hand, every action has a reaction. And the reaction here is that maybe you're watering things down for people. And looking ahead, where are we headed here over the coming months? I mean, do you see any sort of turnaround in the cards for us, or are we kind of just going to keep crawling along here until we can find a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, the freight market is highly cyclical, and what that history tells us is that it's probably going to get a little worse before it gets better in terms of what we see from an employment number perspective. Capacity exiting the market, like I said, creates more balance. It gets rates back up to a profitable level for carriers, where we start to see better conditions. That it's going to take capacity exiting the market, especially because on the demand side of things, there's not really a lot of reason to be optimistic for what I would call COVID level type of growth, right? We're looking at a flat to slow growth environment on the demand side. And so from that perspective, it's really going to take capacity exiting or driver capacity exiting the market, to have the desired impact to raise rates. And so that's what our expectation is from an employment perspective as we look forward.
Let's zoom out a little bit here and look at the big picture. We talk about actions and reactions. When you look at the greater economy, we keep hearing kind of, I guess, cautious optimism from policymakers and economists out there who've kind of been saying, it could always be worse. We're on the right track. Recovery's coming, but it's going to be slow. I'm obviously paraphrasing there, but I think that's a fair summary. But as we've kind of pointed out here over the past several minutes, people obviously are hurting out there, particularly in the trucking industry, particularly if you're an owner-operator. But if you look at the greater economy here, David, are we on the right track? Because, again, whatever track we're on right now, it sure does seem like slow going.
Yeah, it does feel that way, and all the data really points to continued strength for the consumer. We're looking at kind of getting over the inventory surplus. Talked to a number of large retailers recently, and consensus on that front seems to be they've worked through a lot of the excess inventories that they've seen, and they're ready to start looking at more normal ordering patterns as we look forward. So there's certainly signs of hope, right? But when you see the type of changes made to contractionary policy on the monetary side with raising interest rates, ultimately, that's going to have an impact down the line, some kind of lag here towards the employment numbers across the larger economy, and certainly that's not an exciting outlook for a freight environment. But ultimately, we also believe that once we start to see interest rates cut, that would be very that's an optimistic look, right? And so as we start to see conditions deteriorate on the economic side, I think there's reason to be optimistic about what that might mean for reinvestment on the business side. That could lead to improved manufacturing and industrial production type numbers. So, like with every cycle, there's ups and downs, there's lags between, like you said, actions and reactions, or actions and desired impact. Hopefully the Fed is able to navigate a relatively soft landing, so to speak, and to use the airplane terminology. But again, so much uncertainty. We could see disruption at any point in time.
Yeah, a lot of turbulence out there to continue that metaphor there. Are you hopeful? I mean, you obviously are talking to people on an everyday basis who have a pretty good grasp of what we're seeing and, the history of all this. Do you have some hope? And if you do, what does that hope look like, and in what form is it taking?
From the trucking perspective, right? Like I said, I think it needs to get worse before it gets better. And those that have been playing the long game and didn't come in and buy equipment when it was 3x the normal price, and not to say those guys did anything wrong, right? There's real opportunity in the marketplace, but I think that we're seeing the challenges from those that are trying to play the game versus those that are here to stay. And I think those that are here to stay, there's certainly a bright light at the end of the tunnel here, and reason to be optimistic about what's ahead. Right, cycles come around. I think the situation with fuel right now is a really interesting one, and what's going on in Gaza, Israel, the impact that could have. Yes, we saw the national average fuel rate come down this week, but there's a lag between when we see the oil prices go up and that translates to retail. So the expectation is fuel is going to go up, and when fuel goes up, that's problematic for carrier financials as well. There's a bit of a delayed reaction there, but we'll see capacity exits accelerate, and ultimately that's what's going to get us back to a good freight environment with more fair and sustainable rates, and that's our outlook.
Yeah, that all makes sense there. We've got all these numbers floating around, and you've put them into perspective quite well. I do kind of anticipate for, your everyday truck driver out there, maybe listening to this, maybe they're an owner-operator. They see these numbers come out on a monthly basis. They hear us talk about them. What should they be making of all of this? Is there something that can help them, I guess, glean some advice for their everyday operations and what they should be doing?
Yeah, it's really dependent on who you are as a carrier and what kind of business you're running, right? I think that last time, I think the message was be flexible that I provided. I think, again, now it's know your cost structure, know where, know what's influencing your cash flow, know what's influencing your ability to, keep running and keep running in a way that is sustainable. If you haven't gone in and figured out your books yet, you need to be doing that. We're looking at more financial stress and pressure, not necessarily improving conditions in the short term, but that's what we're thinking is sort of by midpoint next year, we're seeing a lot more vulnerability in the market, and we think a lot more rationalization, to the upside here.
Yeah, certainly. All of this seems bleak, and it sounds bleak, and it feels bleak for a lot of people out there. There's no doubt about that. But as you point out there, I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think we can maybe kind of make it out there. And you mentioned the middle of next year. I think that's what most economists are kind of pinpointing as maybe the point at which we start to turn around here. And we'll keep our fingers crossed that it does happen, if not before then, at least by then. David, real quick here as we wrap things up, Arrive Logistics, you're doing a lot of great work out there. Where can people go? Where should they go for more information?
Yeah, ArriveLogistics.com is a great source of information, and all the intelligence that we're putting together and research is available for free as you navigate to our insights page on our website. That's a great first stop. Very active on LinkedIn, sharing our thoughts and our commentary, and we put all this intelligence together, like I said, in a monthly market update and into a quarterly forecast and forecast review. We review what we said was going to happen versus what actually happened, so we hold ourselves accountable. So encourage everyone to check it out, and feel free to reach out for more information and if they have any questions.
David, thanks so much for your time and, again, for putting all this into perspective. We appreciate it.
No, thank you very much. Pleasure to be on the show.
Our thanks to David Spencer of Arrive Logistics. Landline Now is back in just a moment.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
When it's time to overhaul your truck engine, help protect it by insisting on a genuine Vibratech TVD crankshaft damper. Heavy duty, absolute premium quality, and they're made right here in the USA. Find a dealer at vibratechtvd.com.
Landline Now, welcome back. Every day, truckers are running into problems and challenges out on the road, and many of those truckers call OOIDA for help. They often find themselves talking with the association's Business Services Department. Here is some advice on some of the more common topics right now are Tom Crowley and Joe Biggs of OOIDA's Business Services. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us on, Mark.
Always good to be here.
Let's talk about dispatching companies, and people are wondering if there are any good ones out there. For folks that haven't used one before, what role do dispatching companies play? What do they do precisely for the truckers who use them?
Well, Mark, a dispatch company can be beneficial to a carrier. They can help them procure loads, source loads, negotiate rates. Some of your carriers are unfortunately not the best negotiators, so maybe a dispatch service can help them with better rate negotiations. Some of the dispatch services offer other services too. They do some of the back end stuff that needs to be done as far as compliance issues and maybe driver qualifications and help guide some small carriers on being compliant with the FMCSA. I mean, so there are some dispatch services out there that do provide to some carriers that need that type of help, some assistance.
How does this differ from brokers?
Oh, that's the thing. The FMCSA came out here, last year or a year and a half ago with the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And they kind of went through the definitions of broker, bona fide agent. What's the difference? Of course, a broker, they will put freight out. I mean, a broker makes their money by they get a load from a shipper, pays X amount of dollars. They get a carrier to haul it for less amount of dollars. There's the broker's profit margin. The money goes through the broker to the carrier. A bona fide agent or a dispatch service, the money goes to the carrier and the carrier pays the agent or the dispatch service. And really that's the biggest difference is the flow of the money. Now, granted, brokers have a lot of direct shipper contacts, and the shipper only doesn't want to deal with a whole bunch of carriers, and that's why they use a broker. The dispatch service can dispatch for different carriers, but it comes back to the carrier is the one that has to make the decisions. The dispatch service cannot make the decision and cannot source loads for a carrier without the carrier's approval.
Well, and from what you've said, the dispatch service is trying to bargain up the price that you're hauling for, whereas the broker, of course, is always trying to get the lowest price.
Absolutely. And that was, I think, the biggest contention that brokers have with dispatch services is, some of these folks that are not the greatest negotiators, they do hire them to help them out. And, brokers don't want somebody to negotiate. They just want them to take that cheap price they throw out there. So that's some of it. I mean, and there are some other things that dispatch services do. And as a one truck operation, where you're the driver, the mechanic, the account, everything. I mean, there's a lot there that a small carrier has to deal with. And in some cases, if you don't mind parting with some of your income, because everything happens at a cost. But if you don't mind parting with some of your income, a dispatch service could possibly be a good fit for you. Now, with all the fraud that goes on in the industry today, it is absolutely imperative that you vet your dispatch service, that you vet a broker, that anybody that you deal with, anybody you're going to give sensitive information about your carrier to, you got to know who they are. You got to know that they're above board players. So there's always that aspect. But many dispatch services out there, and I don't have any numbers on how many there are. I know there are a lot. They can perform a decent service for a carrier that needs that type of service.
You mentioned vetting them, and with brokers, you've got credit checks that you can do through credit check services. If you use a factoring company, a lot of them offer credit checks on brokers. Is there something similar that you can use to vet dispatch services?
No, not really. I mean, and I talk to a lot of folks that say they get a lot of these cold calls from dispatch services wanting them to sign up with them, this and that. You know, be leery. Be the one that reaches out to a dispatch service. Don't just go with the first one that calls you up, because, you know, we know for a fact that, you know, your carrier information is public on the FMCSA's website. Anybody can get it, and, you know, there are all these data mining programs out there that pull this information and bundle it up and sell it. You know, talk to your fellow truckers or you know, brother truckers. Find out who they're using, if they're using one. Ask for references and definitely vet those references. Go back through that information. The more information you get, because keep in mind, dispatch services, there's no license requirement. They're not certified. You know, a broker, they have to get the brokerage authority. A carrier has to have authority. Freight forwarder. Dispatch services, there is no authority. They're working under the carrier or for the carrier, so they will work under your authority. So there's no one source for vetting dispatch services. So due diligence, you know, and like I said, one of the biggest resources is other carriers. You know, see who they're using. If that's what a service you're looking for, see who your brother's using.
You talked about some of the upsides of using these services, and there are some. What about downsides? What are the potential pitfalls you can run into?
Well, some of the downsides are, does the dispatch service vet the brokers well? You know, because there are so many of this fake brokerage and double brokers going on and all this stuff. So the dispatch service is getting paid by the carrier. Are they going out of their way to make sure that that's a legitimate load, that it's a legitimate broker? I mean, your better dispatch services, you know, they got a book of business with some brokers that they're used to dealing with, and they kind of know. But and not to say just your better, but it may be a newer dispatch service that doesn't have those connections yet. You know, are you willing to take a chance that their connections are all solid and legitimate? You know, because the bottom line is, if you haul that load and you don't get paid, it's you that suffers. It's your family that doesn't eat. It's your truck that doesn't get fuel. You know, everybody else is getting paid. It's the carrier. So that's where a dispatch service, you just really need to know who you're working with and that they're doing their job to the fullest extent. And there should also be a written agreement between you and this dispatch service in place. You know, something that details, I mean, because everything you do is contractual. Everything you do with the broker is contractual. It's all. So you need to have a contract with the dispatch service and know that it's in place and that they are working on your behalf.
A couple of years back, you didn't hear much about these. Now I'm hearing more and more about them. Are these becoming a lot more common now?
They are. You know, and with the trucking industry, I mean, as time goes on, there are all kinds of third-party players involved. You know, whether it's dispatch services, factors, you know, just all across the board, there are places for others to get into the business. And ultimately, for the carrier, it's less money for you, because everybody that jumps in along the steps of the way between the shipper who pays the bill and the carrier who receives that final payment, the more people that get in the mix, the less money trickles down to you. You know, so that's something to be leery of. And to answer your question, yeah, there are a lot of players out there, and based on the very loose interpretations or loose or non-existent enforcement from the FMCSA over a lot of issues, there's a lot of fraudulent players out there, and that's why I keep bringing that up. You really need to be leery of that.
Okay. Let's go on to another topic here, which is getting your own authority. And a lot of people are wondering if this is a good time to be doing that. Joe, what are some of the upsides right now to getting your own authority, or are there any?
Honestly, currently, no, not particularly. Now, I mean, I've talked to a few different guys who got their authority because they're from a town where they got a shipper they're going to do direct freight for, and that very well may be, your golden goose there. But for most people who are going to be coming in, working with brokers or off load boards, I mean, rates are down, fuel's up. everything's getting more costly, and the rates are not matching that.
What's involved in getting your authority? What is the basic process you have to go through?
The start, you have to get your US DOT number, put the application in for the MC number, and in the meantime, that takes probably about 30 days, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. You got to get the equipment, you got to get the insurance for it to fully go active once you get the letter saying you're good to go.
And of course, you've got to be part of a drug testing consortium as well.
Right. As you move along, of course, if you're going to do interstate, you got to have the 2290, the UCR, all that good stuff. If to IRP, you have to have a drug consortium in place for random testing, and then any permits. If you're going to go through like New York, New Mexico, Oregon, Kentucky, you just got to be wary of what you're doing, where you're going, and making sure that you're qualified to run in that state.
If to an IRP too.
Correct.
And one of the issues with getting your own authority right now is with freight volumes being low and, a lot of trucks in the market, and we know that has a big effect on it, is, you don't really want to be the new kid out there on the block right now. It's difficult enough if you had some relationships established, but being new out there, I mean, it's really tough. I'm not saying somebody couldn't do it, but boy, I would sure pick a better time when you have a better chance for success. It's just rough out there right now.
Well, for somebody that wants to not be a company driver anymore, is leasing onto a carrier the best option right now?
Possibly. I mean, I really go with right now with, if you're keeping the wolves away from the door, doing what you're doing, stay with that. You just don't want to do a lot of changes right now. But, as far as leasing on with a carrier, yeah, I mean, that it is a simpler route than having your own authority because the carrier takes care of all that DOT, all the stuff that you mentioned, the drug consortium, all the back office stuff, the IRP, the IFTA. Usually the carrier will deal with most of that. You as the owner-operator really, just deal with your truck, getting it where it needs to be and making sure it's up to par. I fall back on if you're keeping the wolves away, I would be leery about making any big moves.
Okay. One of the things you got to do is you've got to be able to buy a truck if you're going to be on your own authority or if you're going to lease on with a carrier. What are the options for financing a truck right now?
I mean, there are options. Interest rates are high, as we know. The feds have been raising them, and then, it's hard to say what's going to happen in 3 weeks if they're going to raise them again. Interest rates are high. Borrowing money is costly. There are options out there. I always suggest people, get with your local savings and loan or your local bank, whoever you're already doing business with. That's the first place you want to go. There are truck lots out there. There are places that will finance you. But, and while trucks are going for reasonable prices right now, there's a reason why. That's because there are a lot of them on the market for sale. You can get some decent equipment for a reasonable price if you have the financing in place, but just, know that it's tough out there. And, if you've got a $2,500 a month truck payment, that's got to be made no matter what the rates are, you still got to make that payment and that insurance. That's another biggie.
I think a lot of folks might also be tempted by lease purchase deals, and we've just got a little bit of time left, but I'm sure that you have a strong opinion on that, Tom.
Lease purchases are rarely do you ever see anybody succeed in one. If you're just wanting to go drive for somebody else and pay for their equipment, there you go, lease purchase. If you want to make a paycheck and support your family and progress, I'd be very leery about lease purchases.
Okay. Well, guys, that's all the time we have, but thank you very much for all the information. We sure appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely.
I've been talking with Tom Crowley and Joe Biggs of OOIDA's Business Services Department. And folks, if you have a question or a concern or something you need help with, call Business Services. The number is 816-229-5791. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one, That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, where's the freight going to be and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now senior correspondent Ashley Blackford will bring us answers to both of those important questions with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Ashley now with the report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello once again to Robert Rouse with DAT. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great, Ashley. Thanks for asking.
Now, as we transition into the fall season, what developments are unfolding in the spot market?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Last week, we saw just over a 16% decrease in load volume to just over 1.152 million loads. This is kind of what we expected to happen last week, as the prior week was slightly inflated by the end of quarter freight. While this is lower than the pre-pandemic amount, this feels like we're at the low end of the freight volume for the year. This is the second lowest week of the entire year so far. We should expect to see this volume for the next couple of weeks before we see a slight increase in the couple of weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. That's really where we're going to see freight volumes pick up a little bit based off of the years past. When we look at the number of trucks on the DAT load board, they decreased by around 7% to 397,000 trucks. While we've talked a lot about carriers leaving the market this year, the DAT load board has actually averaged around 397,000 trucks in the market all year. So it's been fairly consistent, even though we've seen some ups and downs. When we look at the big events that's going on in the market this week, we still think that all drivers should really be watching the UAW strike. We're still seeing freight volume shifting as the UAW members continue their strike at the big three automakers. However, on Monday, the UAW members at Mack Trucks rejected their labor agreement and went on strike as well. If this strike goes on for as long as the big three, which is entering in their fourth week, that can have a real impact on new trucks entering the market over the next couple of months. Plus, it could have an issue with parts getting to the right places as well, because they're just not manufacturing quite as much. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw load-to-truck ratios decrease across all three equipment types by as much as 27%. When we look at reefers, the volume of reefer load posts decreased by about 13% last week. That was influenced by about 5% week-over-week decrease in the national produce truckload volume. And impacting the softer reefer markets is a 17% lower truckload produce volume originating out of California. And although we're in a transition period between summer and fall produce season, volumes in the cooler northern tier of the country are insufficient to impact the national reefer demand so far. Spot market volumes are around half what they were about a year ago, and also compared to the pre-pandemic average for week 40 of the year. Carrier equipment posts increased by about 4% week over week for reefers, and that resulted in last week's reefer load-to-truck ratio decreasing by about 16% to 2.83. Lastly, looking at the spot rates, national benchmark broker-to-carrier spot rates without fuel decreased anywhere from 2 to 4 cents for all three equipment types. And this is somewhat expected, as the last week the spot rates were driven up by the end of month and quarter shipping volume gains. The spot market is still rolling along the bottom, and we expect it to kind of stay here or bump up a little bit until we get into that late year market.
With the reefer market softening on the West Coast, where should reefer carriers look for freight over the next couple of months?
Yeah, the biggest produce volume that you're going to see, or a good chunk of it, you're going to see it's sweet potato season. That meaning reefer capacity could tighten in the North Carolina, which is the leading producer for sweet potatoes in the United States. It accounts for 76% of the annual tonnage. For the last 8 weeks, the USDA has also reported a slight shortage of trucks in Delaware, Maryland, and the Eastern Virginia region. And one of only 20 produce growing regions tracked weekly by the USDA to report a shortage of reefer equipment. California, Mississippi, and Louisiana also account for about 36% of the annual sweet potato production. In the U.S., sweet potatoes are generally harvested in September and early October. However, it can take up to 8 weeks of curing and storage after harvest before sweet potatoes sweeten and develop the texture that we're accustomed to, putting the root's peak seasonality right around Thanksgiving. November accounts for about 15% of the annual tonnage, although sweet potatoes will be in season in most parts of the U.S. all the way through early spring. Tonnage could be down this year, although North Carolina's sweet potato growers are hopeful that a continuing drop in acreage will lead to tighter supplies and more robust markets and help them cope with inflation and skyrocketing cost. Jeff Thomas, who's a marketing director for Lucama, North Carolina Scott Farms, said everything from packaging to fuel to fertilizer has gone up for them. Meanwhile, sweet potato prices have stagnated, prompting some growers to transition to more lucrative crops like tobacco, soybeans, peanuts, cotton, or corn. And according to the USDA, increasing competition from growers in South Africa and Egypt contributed to North Carolina's sweet potato acreage dropping from about 100,000 acres in 2021 down to 84,000 acres in 2022. So what can you expect when you're hauling sweet potatoes? Sweet potatoes are usually shipped in wooden or cardboard crates that allow some ventilation through. That said, I have seen some that are floor loaded on it by a conveyor belt. These loads require a washout before and after. To unload the potatoes, they actually drive a skid steer into the trailer that scoops up the potatoes and puts them on a conveyor belt that's hooked up to the back of the skid steer. It's pretty interesting to watch if you ever have seen that happen. To keep them fresh, you should ensure that the temperature stays around 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the entire trip. You should also keep the relative humidity as high as possible without resulting in water forming on the sweet potatoes themselves. The ideal relative humidity range is 85 to 90%. That means that they can be hauled by reefers or vented vans to make sure that it gets proper ventilation. Even though Thanksgiving is next month, I know I'm ready for some sweet potato pie.
With seasonal freight coming soon, how does that impact power-only freight, and what tips or tricks do you have for those carriers?
Yeah, definitely. Over the past few years, we've seen an increase in power-only loads on the DAT load board. And over the next couple of months, we should see a lot of traditional package handling companies need additional capacity to pull trailers between distribution centers. The good news is that they usually have quick reloads out of the same location. And probably the best perk of running power only is that most of these loads are drop and hook, so there should be minimal time spent at either the pickup or drop off. There's several types of power only loads. So you'll have a loadout, which is an empty trailer you can typically use for a period of time, and you can book those loads with, so you can use those. You also have a towaway, which is an empty trailer that you cannot load, so you have to watch out for those. The ones that you'll see mostly in the fall season are going to be pick up and drop. Those loaded trailers that you simply pick up and drop off. When sorting through DAT1 load searches, there are a couple things that will help you identify which types of loads you're actually looking at when you're looking at those loads. The first one is weight. You'll notice that any loads that are listed as 10,000 pounds, that's the empty weight of a trailer. And so those results are most likely a loadout or a towaway. If it has a full weight is listed, it's most likely a pickup or drop off. And so you'll see a lot of those on the load board this time of year. The second thing you can look at is the comment section on power only loads. Brokers typically know whether it's a loadout or a towaway. So just look in the comments to see if there's anything in their load details that specifically says what type of equipment it is.
All right. If our listeners want more information, where can they go for that?
Absolutely. You can get the latest rate information at dat.com/trendlines, or look for the weekly market updates on the DAT blog. They're published every Wednesday. And check out and subscribe to the DAT IQ channel on YouTube.
All right. Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley.
That was Robert Rouse with DAT. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
Chrome. And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.